Welcome to the My Tech Toolbelt podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Brenda. And this is a podcast where we highlight educators who innovate, engage, and inspire through the use of technology. Thank you so much for joining us today for episode 20 of the My Tech Toolbelt podcast. Joining us today is Peter Paccone. Peter is a high school social studies teacher from California with over 30 years of teacher experience. Peter is also the KQED in the Classroom Publications Manager and a member of several teacher advisory committees. He also writes for several education-related online publications like Edutopia and PBS's Teacher Lounge. Peter wasn't sure that a program like Kahoot could work in the types of classes that he teaches, classes like Advanced Placement U.S. History. So join us today as we listen to his story of how he uses Kahoot in his classroom. So without further ado, our interview with Peter Paccone. Well, today we are so excited to welcome Peter Paccone to the My Tech Toolbelt podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Peter, we've been friends on Twitter for a while. I've Twitter known you for a while, but we just kind of met recently, and we were introduced by the Kahoot team, because you're going to talk a little bit about Kahoot today. But before we kind of dive deep into that, will you tell us a little bit about how you got into teaching, where you teach, and just kind of set the stage for us today?
I've been teaching for about a little over 30 years, and I teach at San Marino High School. That's a public school located here in the Los Angeles area. And I got into teaching because my desire after Berkeley to get into law didn't quite work out the way that I wanted it to. 1 year at law school, and it was either I move on or they were going to tell me to move on. So teaching for me was, in fact, the fallback plan.
Okay. But 30 years later, you're very successful at it.
It's been a nice run lately.
Yeah. You teach social studies.
I teach social studies. Over the years, I'm probably most known for being the government teacher, though I've taught many years of psychology. And then in more recent times, U.S. history and world history.
So today, like I said, we were connected through the Kahoot team because you are using Kahoot as one of the tools to engage your classroom. So if you could tell us a little bit about what inspired you, what was like the challenge that was happening in your class that you picked up Kahoot and said, this solves my challenge?
Well, it's interesting. Kahoot for me wasn't one of those things that solved a challenge. Kahoot for me, I came to, like so many people, by way of the music. I heard the music somewhere, probably passing some teacher's room somewhere and hearing the music. And the next thing I remember is popping my head in, and I don't even remember where, but some teacher and seeing the Kahoot screen projected up onto the wall. And I have to be honest, and Kahoot knows this. I saw that. The music, I saw those initial images, and it just didn't work for me. I thought for sure my 12th grade government students, my 11th grade U.S. history students, there's no way they were going to be interested in that. I don't know why. I guess I figured I was walking past a teacher who was teaching freshmen or something like that. And yet we have really incredible gifted teachers here at San Marino High School. And one in particular is named David Irier, and he also teaches AP government as well. And he knows my work outside of the school with tech and all of that. Promoting tech, learning about new forms of ed tech, testing out new forms of ed tech and all that. And at one point he said to me, you really have to give Kahoot a try. And this was probably about 3 years ago. And I really respect him. It's a tremendous talent. And yet when he said that to me, I said, David, you teach 12th graders, you teach AP US Gov. Are you kidding me? How can you buy into this thing? I've heard the music. I've seen the kids in the room. I don't know. And so I just let it go. And of course, he came back to me a short time later, or sometime later. He said, no, you really have to give it a go. And he kept after me. And so I did. And, it's one of those programs where I've learned, as so many have learned, kids really like it. You start that music and the entire room will break into a smile. And I'm thinking about that. They'll break into a smile, the spirit will lift. You think about all the music on the planet, which lifts spirits. Spice Girls will lift an entire room right over you. And this is one of those things. A little bit of the Rolling Stones lifts the spirit of kids. And Kahoot does that music. And then, of course, the educational value of it. But that's how I came to it, just being encouraged by one of my colleagues who got me past whatever reluctance and resistance I had from the outset. And then it took off from there.
That's so great. So it was actually your resistance to it that kind of prohibited you from doing it, not necessarily the kids couldn't manage it or anything like that. They loved it.
So, Peter, before we get too far into the whole the website, can you just basically tell us what Kahoot is exactly?
Well, I wrote an article about Kahoot just a little under a year ago, and in that article, I described it as a multiple choice quiz created with the help of a web-based application program known as Kahoot. So a Kahoot is a quiz, and it's created with the application program called Kahoot. When completed, Kahoot quiz questions, they're projected onto a screen, typically located at the front of the room, though it can also be projected onto a student's computer and now even onto their iPhone, smartphone. It's projected in real time, and the students' answers are revealed on the screen as soon as they are submitted. So teacher can create a quiz, project that up onto the screen, quiz related to the content being taught in the class at that particular point in time, multiple choice, true, false, or a variety of different kinds of questions. And the students can answer from their seats. And as soon as they do, that answer gets recorded, and you can see who is answering correctly or to what extent the class is answering correctly and so on.
And how are they answering this? They're doing it on a tablet or a computer?
Definitely. In my class, they're doing it on a Chromebook. We have a full set of Chromebooks in the room, and they can do it from there. Although students are also real comfortable just doing it from their cell phones.
That's awesome. So it doesn't show on the overhead that Johnny picked B and...
Correct. It's not showing
individual
scores. It is showing class scores. 80% of the class got letter D. That was the correct answer, and so on.
And this is one at a time? I mean, one question at a time?
One question at a time. So the entire class is playing the game together. And, as I was alluding to here earlier, so that the music and that format, it creates an energy. It really does. And it creates an energy even with incredibly talented and gifted kids. And you're certainly not going to win over everyone all the time. Nothing does. But the healthy percentages of students who seem to enjoy, and that's the thing that has really amazed me, is the talented, hardworking, ambitious students will even look forward to playing.
And is it timed?
Yes, it is. The program creates a pace. So there's a little clock that ticks down, and you can see how many more seconds you have in which to answer the question, and then the score is revealed. And then we move on to the next question. Teacher can control that to some extent as well. A little variation can be built in. There's a timing, and I'm not really sure what it is. My guess would probably be 20 seconds, question, answer, score revealed, move on, somewhere in that 20-second realm.
And I think that all can be adjusted in the back end on the teacher's side. If a kindergarten teacher was using this tool, they could give it 30 seconds or 40 seconds or even a minute for them to figure out what it is. Whereas on the 12th grade section, you might have it 15 to 20 seconds tops.
Right. And I'm just talking about the default.
Yeah. The default, I'm sure, is something quick, 20 to 30 seconds. Have any of your students made Kahoots to share with each other?
I wanted to get to that. Yeah. So that's the sort of the standard way in which Kahoot is being used in classes across the country today. But for me personally, I'm real big on moving students to content creators. There are many opportunities I give throughout the course of a year in whatever class I'm teaching, where students just aren't passively learning information, but are becoming active learners. And so for me, what I use Kahoot more than anything is to give students an opportunity to create these kind of questions, to create a Kahoot of their own. In other words, to take the role of the teacher. And I have a whole process, which I described in this article. We'd be more than glad to share them.
Yeah, great. We'll definitely link the article to our show notes. So you're having them create and share with each other, and are they sharing it with you and you're projecting it to the whole class?
The answer to that is it depends. But generally speaking, do you want me to go through the steps for how I have them do that?
That'd be
awesome.
great.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I take, for example, just the standard world history or the standard U.S. history course I did in U.S. history last year. It has 20 chapters, let's say, or 20, 30 chapters, whatever it is. And you divide those chapters up evenly, whatever your class is. So if you've got 15 chapters, it's maybe 2 kids working on, or 3, however you want to do it. But you're assigning a certain number of students to create the Kahoot, the quiz, for one chapter of the textbook. And I give them in-class time to look through the chapter and then to create a draft of those questions on a Google Doc. We will then periodically project that Google Doc up onto the screen, talk about what it takes to write a good question. There's a certain skill involved there. Is that we talk about whether the question is too easy. We talk about whether the question is an exercise in trivial pursuit. Is this the kind of question that really reveals the important content? And I like to put a limit on the number of questions, 10 or 20, whatever the case might be. So the students are really forced to pull from all those pages that are in the chapter the important content, or at least to try to pull forth that important content. We also look to see, did you ask really the same question twice, just use different words? And so a lot of work goes into that, critical thinking work, writing work, looking whether they are being vague and ambiguous. Can everybody answer this question? Or would anybody say, wait a minute, I'm not really sure what you're asking here? And so that writing skill is what we really work on. I'm fine that after a while, students really get into that. It becomes an energizing bit of work for them. I have them also go online and look for an image to accompany each question and an image that would go at the very top of the quiz itself. And that's certainly, you can do that with Kahoot. And I find that exercise is exciting in and of itself, because say for example, the students are doing creating a question about the French and Indian War. So the question becomes, well, what image are we going to use? What's really the best image? And so they'll spend a considerable amount of time talking about, not this image, how about that one? Why this image? Why not that one? They're analyzing these images and, of course, retaining and reinforcing content in the process, which is the goal of the exercise, to really thoroughly learn the French and Indian War by taking on the role of a teacher. And we always say, you don't really learn a subject till you teach it. To me, that's one of the beautiful things of having students create quizzes and tests, no matter what tool they use. It just seems they really enjoy doing it with Kahoot.
That's fantastic.
I'm sorry, I may have missed this. You have a small group that creates the test for the whole class, or you have everyone in the class create their own Kahoot for each chapter?
No, I have a small group create a quiz for one chapter in the text, so that when it's all done, we have quizzes for each chapter of the text.
So they can refer back to it and practice as you're kind of getting ready for maybe finals or midterms.
Unit tests, exactly. And then we'll put those up onto the wall, and I teach 5 periods of U.S. history, so I could take my 3rd period quizzes and show them to my 5th period quizzes, and vice versa. Then there's also the sense that it's fresh and they haven't heard questions and answers being discussed in class in the days leading up.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. And so what do your students think about this? Do they like creating their own tests?
I have this belief that school should be not just informative, it should also be interesting, and it should be engaging. And everything that I do, I want to have be interesting, informative, and engaging. And so that's the standard by which I judge. And I've asked the students in past years, scale of 1 to 10, just how interesting, informative, and engaging was my lecture, or was this activity, or whatever the case is. And so I asked them last year, scale of 1 to 10, how interesting, informative, and engaging was this activity, creating your own Kahoots. Scale of 7 or better, I wrote it in the article, somewhere above a 7, somewhere between a 7 and an 8. And in my opinion, anytime you get 7 or better, anytime, just take that to the bank. Don't fret it. If you want to, maybe next time around, shoot for the 8. But it's the less than 7s that you have to worry about.
Right.
I'm thinking about one particular lecture last year where I didn't get anywhere close to a 7, and obviously I'm not doing that anymore.
Revising that lecture.
I don't even know if that one is revisable. That one just might be gone.
One of the things that it fascinates me about Kahoot is the data that you're able to kind of collect on the back end from the students. Are you using that data?
Well, you know what? No, I'm not. And so my sort of journey with Kahoot was that 3 years ago was having it presented to me. 2 years ago, having sort of tested it out and having my eyes opened. And then last year, really going into it in the U.S. history class and seeing that great surprise with very talented students taking to it. I'm aware of the point you're making here. That's sort of on my radar for this year.
Okay, that's good. Because the kind of the follow-up to that is, are you using this for formative assessment or it's practice? And it sounds like right now it's more engagement and practice and reiteration for the kids to kind of prep for these bigger unit tests or bigger final tests, maybe. Whereas you're not using the data right now to kind of make decisions in your instruction making or as like exit tickets or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay, that's fine. That's one tool, one piece of the puzzle that you can either use or not use. So it's
as a history teacher right now, the course I taught last year, it wasn't designed to prep them for the AP test, but I knew that this year the course that I would teach would be just that. And so I was very curious to see whether there would be a place for Kahoot in the typical AP US history course. And I belong to this network of some 2,700 AP US history teachers worldwide. And it's a closed Facebook group, and we chat every now and then. And so based on last year's experimentation, I concluded, yes, even at a high achieving school, there is a place for it. And certainly this AP government teacher who I just told you about earlier, he believes there's a place for high achieving students in an AP Gov course. That was really sort of what I think the two of us have come to conclude, that there is a place for just that sort of thing in these kind of classes.
That's great, because we want them to not only learn the information take the AP test, but we want them to retain it and use it to make decisions. It really is not even political. It's about understanding the government system and really understanding where your voice is able to be heard and where you can make change if that's something that you need to make change. I mean, right now in history is it's just a very interesting time. You know, you teach high school. These kids are going to be able to vote very, very soon, most likely at the next presidential election and even some of the primaries. So depending on where they sit, and I don't even care where they sit, I just feel like this is now a time where we can really engage them with some of these really cool ideas. I know that, using Kahoot, using any tool, whatever that tool is, to help them remember and say, oh yeah, okay, I do know about this and I can speak intelligently on it, is really, it's made conversations at my house more interesting because, we can have these really, not just philosophical conversations, but really relevant conversations that she's able to bring back to the table based on fact and what she's learning. So I appreciate that the tool is helping them kind of retain and get excited about the content area.
That point that you're making right there, just from someone who sits in the room and is taking in the sound of the room as they are working this through, that is what I believe is happening, that they are retaining the content, thinking much more deeply about the content, and getting engaged in the content. In a social studies course, there's so much that you have to put in front of them. It's hard to get engaged in everything, and yet we all know that the more that occurs, the more they will learn, and that's really what we're all about, teaching and learning, right?
That's right.
So when I sat in the room, I just enjoyed the sound. I would just look, and I would see students going back and forth and having these conversations and these discussions. And I didn't get the sense it was one of those activities where let's just get it done so we can talk about something else.
Right. It's not a high school requirement that you have this class and finish it, right? It's much more than that, right? And I think to get through their heads that their voice and their vote is so important and worthwhile. We don't want them to have that apathetic attitude of, oh, my vote doesn't count, or my voice doesn't count, or it totally counts. And I think this has really changed in the last 20 years, I think.
It seems that way. Yeah. And to be able to ask questions about that which matters. That's
right. And be respectful of,
right.
In these courses, I think it sounds like that you're creating a kind of this collaborative environment based on this, this really important topic, but you're creating this collaborative environment where they can have a critical conversation with each other. They can discuss and debate and still come out with a really good product and push that information forward, which I love. I love how you've taken Kahoot, which in my experience was a primarily teacher-driven, generated, they've got the library with hundreds of thousands of constructed quizzes out there, and you can grab them and manipulate them and push that out there. You flipped it on its head and said, this is now in your hands, kids, and come up with something for your peers and your scholars.
And let's talk about that library for a second, because anybody who chooses to go down this path of having their students create a Kahoot, they're going to bump up against that, where the students say, now, wait a minute, they're already, say, for example, period 1, 1491, 1607. There's already a ton of questions up on Kahoot that relate to that. What do you do? And my response to them was, look at them. Do exactly what a teacher would do. Look at them, analyze them, make a decision for yourself. If you like them, bring them over. If you want to bring them over and make some changes, I don't have a problem with that. Which then comes to the next question: how do you grade these things, right? So you always want to have their work graded. And that was in and of itself a really great learning experience. And I'm not so sure I have a great answer. I will say this: I created this 16-point rubric, and I can send you the link, and you'll see it looks pretty nice on the page, and it works pretty well. But it's just in categories, like so many of these rubrics. And I'm rethinking that. I'm rethinking that, whether to create what we call these 1-point rubrics, which are so popular today, or whether just to give points for the effort alone, regardless of the outcome. Because oftentimes, we give points to motivate them to do the work.
Right. And
in this particular case, it seems like they're willing to do the work regardless of the points. So if you are copying questions over, that of course raises an interesting question. How is that deserving of points? And yet a quality Kahoot quiz is a quality Kahoot quiz. And when we put these up in front of the room, you see it. We're going through it, and all of a sudden someone will say, now wait a minute, right in the middle of the quiz, that question doesn't make any sense. So there's not a one single answer. I will say, yes, I scored them, created a rubric, and I scored them. I'm rethinking all of that this year. And where I'm headed more in my mind at this particular moment is just giving them points for having made the effort, and then not trying to distinguish good quiz from bad quiz. And did someone write their own questions, or did they copy questions, or whatever the case may be.
That makes sense. And I also can speak from experience where I've gone and grabbed what looked to be a good Kahoot, pre-made at first glance, and then actually executed it, and it was wrong. It was on the amendments to the Constitution. And we got about, 4 to 6 in, and I realized that wasn't the right amendment, and so did everyone else in the room. Well, everyone else that knew the amendments, and I was like, probably should have looked at that a little closer. And
2 years ago, the very same thing. Sure. Yeah.
So I got caught, and I was like, my bad. And then we just kind of flipped it on its head and started over. But
even you think back to any textbook, or certainly I have gone through and looked at their questions. Not all of them are correct, right? Or they're horrible questions, right? Or they who worded this? This doesn't even make sense.
Right.
And so I think there's always room for improvement.
Sure.
And I think if you find that, say your students make a Kahoot and you find that most of the people get it wrong, okay, then maybe there's a problem either with the answer is not correct, or what they viewed as the answer was not correct, or the question is incorrect.
Right.
So maybe that's how you would grade as far as how many people get. Well, obviously you don't want super easy questions either, but
you don't want super easy questions. You don't want questions that go over the top, answers that are obvious, and questions that take a student to Trivial Pursuit. Those are sort of my 2 extreme limits. Right. And then, of course, you don't want questions that are so vague and ambiguous that it causes the student test taker, quiz taker, to say, I don't know how to answer this question. I'm not even really sure what you're answering or what you're asking, or the answer doesn't appear here based on how I'm interpreting the question.
Right.
And that's a great learning experience.
It is.
So Kahoot is free.
Kahoot is free.
No, there's no paid version of Kahoot out there at all.
I'm not sure about that.
I don't recall ever seeing anything on that.
I don't think so. I'm a real big one for sharing is caring in this day and age. So I like to especially explore ed tech that is free. If there is a paid version, I'm not aware of it.
If there's a paid version, you haven't needed it.
I haven't needed it.
That's how I feel too. I haven't needed it. I think it's totally free. And so and it works on all platforms.
Yes, it does. They recently, just a few months back, upgraded it. They had an update which allowed it to be played right from the app on their smartphone.
Yeah, I think you just plug in the code and it lets you join right from there. That has been a huge, when we do professional development and I use Kahoot, that's been a kind of a game changer. And the kids don't need to have a login or anything like that. It's open for anyone to join.
It is a game changer. When it came out, I took a close look at it, and I was so impressed with this update that I produced I think a 500-word blog post on it. Put it up on Medium, and I just entitled it "Kahoot Launches New Update, Allowing Students to Create Kahoots Right from the App." And I'll send you the link for that. You can share that. My students now no longer need to rely on the classroom computers to go from consumer of content to creator of knowledge. Now they can also create their questions while on the go. That's
so great. For kids who are, involved in athletics and things like that, when they're on a bus, they can be working, they can be working while they're traveling. They can be working. Most of our students, I would say probably most of your students at your high school, but most of the ones I see, they have a device. Mm-hmm. I know it's not the norm across the country, but I would say it's high up there. I don't know. I can't say that everyone has it, but I would say it is a norm. It is a norm across the country, but I know not 100%.
Especially for high school students.
High school students, yeah.
And if it isn't the norm, how many years before it is?
Right.
I mean,
it's coming. It's rapid. Yeah. No, I think it is a norm in high school, but I can't say it's 100% because we do have, poverty across the country in different pockets. So, and then I'm thinking about, how kids might use this if they're homeschooled. And have you had any experience? Have you talked to anyone that might be using this?
It's interesting you should ask. I did have an opportunity last year. It was all set to go to work with not someone who was homeschooled, but someone who needed to stay at home indefinitely for health reasons. So I guess that's a form of homeschooling,
sure.
except that the teachers were going to work with the student as opposed to the parents alone. And we had it all set up that they were going to engage in this little activity. And then for reasons that had to do with the school and the students' health and so on, we didn't continue to do that work. I didn't continue to work with that students, and they moved or it just ended. But I was really wanting to see how that would work. Yeah. Is
there a way that Kahoot can be run without it being live?
Well, that's a great question. And I've really wanted to know that. So let's say, for example, you're saying, if my students create a Kahoot quiz and there are students elsewhere in the world, could they take that quiz by themselves from that location, right? Mm-hmm. That's the question? That's the question,
yes.
And I have been told yes. Just as of a few months ago, I was told yes, that they can do that. So I was hoping that the explanation for how to do that would be added to the comment section of one of my articles so that I could actually see it. And I believe that's still going to happen. There are a few steps that have to take place there, and I have not had a chance to have my students test it out yet. But I've been given those steps, and I was hoping someone would add that description to one of the articles so we would all have it. I will look into it.
Hopefully maybe one of our listeners have tried it or will be inspired to try it and can go to your blog posts and give more feedback on that. I would be curious too, because I know that's kind of like you could assign it as homework, right? And they could work through it at their own time over, and they could be practicing this and then come back and you could grab that data. That's where you could start looking at the data and be like, oh, I need to reteach this, or I need to focus on these questions.
Well, yes. And then even another step would be something like this. Say, for example, a history teacher, assign your students or ask your students to explore some element of local history that somehow relates to that which is being covered in the textbook. So let's just say, for example, U.S. history makes a big point, progressive era muck rakers. It teaches what is a muck raker, it talks about two famous muck rakers, Pulitzer and Hearst. So you say to your students, okay, I want you to find out for me, during the progressive era, who was the most famous muckraker in this particular area, wherever we might be living. Well, in the Los Angeles area, interesting enough, turns out to be this guy by the name of Clifford Clinton, who has given rise to this Disneyland-like experience restaurant downtown Los Angeles called Clifford's. And so my thinking would be to have students create those kind of questions, not only about the guy, but about something here today that relates to that. So if you go to the restaurant, it just adds those connections. They can create the quiz, give their friends the quiz. Think of it as like a quiz about a field trip, maybe something like that. Obviously, I don't have all the thought clear in my mind yet, but I'm headed in that direction, wondering if the quiz couldn't be created about something local history oriented.
Right. To really make the connections back to what their experiences are, or something. I know that would make your students really more excited to go explore their own backyard. We tend to explore Europe and have these Hawaii, and we have these great experiences outside, and Brenda knows I'm a big California history buff, and so my goal is to see all the historical landmarks in California. And I have friends that'll take pictures of historical landmarks and be like, here's one. And I'm like, actually, that's like a city landmark, or that's not really a California historical landmark. But thanks, you're trying to help me out. But it makes those connections to, as I have out of fourth grader last year, a fifth grader this year, we're making connections back to our history, our local history, California history. So fun. And a Kahoot would be great.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Getting them to see how big picture U.S. history connects to something local and local community thing within an hour's drive, as far as I'm.
Absolutely. I did 2 hours yesterday. It was we hit Poway and went to a battlefield down in that space with the Mexican-American War. Had this great conversation with my son. It was fantastic. So, but again, that was all stuff that he was able to connect back to whatever his experience was in school, and he had a teacher that really used different technologies to engage them, and lots of videos and things like that, which I think are extremely important too.
So, Peter, what, I guess, is the marker or change in your students since you've been using Kahoot? Have you noticed the test scores going up, or the engagement changing, or just that they are actually understanding more of it?
Directly linked to Kahoot, the only thing I would say is, the only thing that I've noticed is just that, is bringing it into the classroom has had such a positive effect that I will continue to bring it into the classroom. As far as the extent to which it has increases any kind of test score or something like that, I haven't done that kind of work yet. But it would be interesting. One of the things I do is I ask the students at the beginning of the year, as they walk through the door, to what extent are they looking forward to the course called U.S. History? A 10 is, well, I can't even wait. This is going to be the greatest thing since the invention of sliced bread. And a 1 would be, are you kidding me? I'm dreading every second of this right now. And then asking the students at the end of the year the same kind of question to see if there's an increase in point value. And so I always do that anyway. But maybe what I'll do is this year, at the end of the year, is ask them of all the things we did to rank the Kahoot experience in terms of most engaging, or where it was in terms of a 1 to 10 engaging kind of scale. Might do that.
That'd be interesting to see that data. Okay, Peter, a couple last questions here. Knowing what you know now, if you were going to be kind of giving advice to some of our new teachers kind of coming into this field, just kind of starting off their career, what would that advice be?
The first bit of advice that I would give all new teachers is to read the articles that are today being written by teachers for teachers, and describing either how technology is being integrated into their classrooms or whatever they are doing. Because we live in this era where this is happening today. And whether you go to KQED's In the Classroom website, which is articles by teachers for teachers on how they integrate technology, or you read the articles by teachers on Edutopia, tons of great stuff up there, or PBS's Teachers Lounge. I would strongly recommend, if you have some time and you're a new teacher, just go to those websites, look, see what's there that interests you. Real great stuff there for teachers. I think the other thing I would recommend to new teachers, and I only was able to appreciate this much, much later in my career, is go to conferences, go to teacher conferences. They are valuable. And yes, I realize they cost a lot of money, and younger teachers usually aren't going to pay for that themselves, but ask your administrators to support that and go. So those are the two big things. Go to teacher conferences and spend your time reading the free stuff that's online. Those aren't too good.
And listen to some podcasts.
Oh, well, yes. Let's throw that in there. So it's all free these days. And podcasting for me, even listening to podcasts is something I've just been exploring the last 2 years. I'm thinking one podcast in particular right now that everybody should listen to. Make your own pitch, okay?
I mean, for us, it has been. I mean, we're new, so we're not. I mean, we're
newer
to the game. We just started in 2018, but it really has changed. Like me as an educator, it's changed how I teach. And I teach at the university level, and I do expose my students who are in teacher interns. New in the classroom to podcasts as being a really amazing form of professional development, an opportunity for them to kind of explore something. I do it as an assignment, so I require them to listen to various things, not necessarily all of our stuff, but I want them to go explore that space because it's something they could do while they're driving. It's something they can do. So I like that. I think those are, and it was very new to me. Brenda was a big podcast listener for a long, long time before she convinced me to start taking this on. I was an audiobook listener, and I was like, oh, this is the same thing, except way more fun. And I can just hit stop, and
That's right.
Or they're just shorter chunks of pieces. I know you had another question, Brenda.
Well, I was just going to ask you if there's been any books that have made an impact on you, either personally or professionally.
I think any of the books that the flipped learning pioneer John Bergman has written have had an impact on me. I came to the world of flipped learning about 5 years ago, and it was something brand new for me. Then I read, he's written several things, and any one of them I would suggest. And I read those. I saw John at a conference. I find great value in the concept of flipped learning. The definition of flipped learning has evolved over time. And then initially, much of the emphasis was on teachers videoing themselves, giving a lecture, sending that home, and then using the class space for activity and things. And today, of course, it has broadened to, it's not just a video. You can be sending home readings and lots of other things, audio clips, whatever. But I would definitely recommend anything by John Bergman to veteran teachers. And the other thing I would recommend to veteran teachers, not along the lines of books, but I would strongly recommend that even if you just go to medium.com or .org, I can't remember which, a free space to write a blog post, write about what you do. And the reason for that is because, in my opinion anyway, there's nothing that forces you to take a closer look at what you're doing and to reflect and revise what you're doing than writing for a real world audience. And you write, you put it up on Medium, and even if nobody ever reads it, just the thought that somebody might really makes you think about your work. So that would be something I'd recommend to veteran teachers, not so much to the newer ones, but definitely to the veterans.
That's fantastic.
Awesome.
I have one last question. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've mentioned your relationship with KQED and that you are a pioneer, I think, in kind of what's coming out in ed tech. You and I, like I said, we kind of follow in the same Twitter chats and things like that. What do you think is like the next step in education technology? What is just about ready to kind of blow up that hasn't yet and just really make an impact in education?
Well, I'm not so sure it's going to, ed tech will obviously continue to evolve. And the ability to use ed tech to personalize instruction, to allow students to go at their own pace in their own time, and then to measure that growth, that obviously is going to happen more and more and more. But I tend to believe that the next big step for education I would like to see the next big step in education be a transformation, especially at the high school level, elimination of these, what we call them silos, integration of the learning, making the high school far less focused on content. I'm not talking about the elimination of content, but just recognizing the high school as can and should be now with the technology. It's a wonderful point in time where students are producing a product or a presentation with the goal of somehow having a voice and impacting the world. That's what I believe.
That's cool.
I know there are others in my area who believe the same thing. One superintendent in particular, just down the street, a guy by the name of David Van Asdal. If anybody wants to see, a superintendent of a high achieving school district paint a clear picture of what the future in education, we're talking 10 years, could and should look like, just type in his name, Dr. David Van Asdal, type in my name as well, and see how he answered questions that I gave to him 2 years ago in an interview. He's not just talking about these changes. He's putting up significant time and money to bring these changes about. Now, at that point, he said 10 years from now. Now he's looking at 8. And I believe he's going to do it. And that would be a whole different kind of high school.
That'd be cool. Is it like interdisciplinary as well as like project-based?
It's infinitely more interdisciplinary. It's infinitely more project-based. It's infinitely more student-driven, yet it doesn't, it's not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Today, so often we use this phrase student-driven as opposed to what I think is technically more correct, student and teacher-driven. We talk about teacher being the guide on the side. I'm not the guide on the side, and I wouldn't recommend anybody's the guide on the side. That implies I'm standing there and waiting for them to have some problem before I step in. I'm a coach, I'm a tutor, I'm a mentor, and I think that's the term. I hate to say it, we're tutor, mentor, coach. That's who we are today. That's the modern teacher. But the tradition is, and it's been this way for a long time. I don't know if it'll come about in 10 years, but certainly we are, in my opinion, we are in one of this history, one of the greatest single periods of educational change. And I think when all is said and done, we will look back and we will say the way that we taught students, the way students learn, and the way we assessed changed, if not radically, certainly changed significantly. That's
awesome. Well, I want to thank you, Peter, for your time today and for joining us on the podcast. You have been a great person to interview, super knowledgeable about not just Kahoot, but many other things. We'll encourage our listeners to go out and check out all of the blog posts that you've written and follow you on Twitter. And your Twitter handle is, if you want to give it to us,
at Peter Paccone.
Got it. We'll have that link on our website as well. Yeah, thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Much enjoyed. And I wish you all well and look forward to hearing the next teacher on one of your podcasts.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
And
we're out. Thanks for listening to the MyTech Toolbelt podcast. If you have enjoyed listening, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or send us some feedback on our website, mytechtoolbelt.com. We would love to hear from you. This will help us deliver the content that you want to hear. Thanks, and we're out.